The 80s and 90s were a mixed bag for both Spider-Man fans and the comics themselves. There were a lot of good stories and interesting ones. However, there were, a good chunk of them that were not so good. Mainly talking about that Clone Saga story that ran its course. Also, it contained the Alien costume saga from Secret Wars, and Venom and Carnage. But one thing that did remain consistent throughout these times of issues was the consistent and effective art by some of the most popular of the entire industry. John Romita Jr., Ron Frenz, and Mark Bagley. Some of the names are going to be discussed in this video. So as mentioned in the last video, this will be discussing only the main line, since if I were to go into others, there would be way too many. The first one discussing now is Keith Pollard. Even though he worked in the 70s, he mainly finished out his work in the 80s, so I'll count it for this video. Just like many other artists, Pollard had a good eye for movement and action. Almost every time Spider-Man movies, there was a sense of motion indicator, which I found to be very appealing for my eyes. He ended up creating Felicia Hardy, which is also known as the Black Cat, one of the most trusted allies and friends of Peter Parker, but now she is his boyfriend. For some reason, thanks Wells for that. But his general art style is comparable and similar enough to the previous 70s and 60s work that it wasn't really that big of a thing to talk about, but overall the storytelling and action was well paced. Now John Romita Jr. on the other hand, he is my personal favorite. Starting in the 80s, he started at an issue of 208 to be exact. His first issue wasn't that great, but it did get better as he got on. Romita initially started emulating his father's style, but adding his own little twists like more dynamic posing and action. Little side note, his action scenes were some of the best in the entire series. However, most of that came from the Straczynski run, starting in 2001. But it did take until the 90s for his initial and, controversial style to come into play. During his time as Stern and the Hobgoblin, he worked well and I found it enjoyable for the time. However, there wasn't too much to talk about during the beginning of his run of working at Marvel. The next one that worked after John Romita Jr. was Ron Frenz, the man behind Spider-Girl. He started his work on Spider-Man issue 251. He was the main artist during that whole alien costume saga right after the Secret Wars, but in my opinion, I didn't really like his 80s art all that much. I mean, I thought it was good, like it was objectively good, just not really my taste at all. I thought he drew the characters a little too skimmy. Like MJ, for example, sometimes she was starving, like those cheekbones were really popping out, but his action wasn't really that eye-opening for me. It felt really stiff, or like the punches didn't really hit that hard. However, but a big however, like I said, he worked on Spider-Girl, and his art greatly improved over the 15 years since then. In general, the Friends art during the 80s was alright at best. The next two I'm going to bundle together, Alan Cooperberg and Alex Savuk. Alan Cooperberg's art is confusing to me. Don't really know why, but I just like it. I like it a lot more than I thought I was going to. His action is worse than Friends. It kind of looks weird, and sometimes he just randomly does lines to show no one's moving, but I don't really get that. And yet, I really enjoy how he draws people. Sometimes he can draw the most chiseled people I've ever seen in my life. Roman gladiators be scared. However, he didn't work on the book for that long. He only worked on it for like a couple issues, and same thing with Savuk, Alex Savuk. He was a brief artist. His art worked well, but it was nothing too out of the norm for the time. I liked his Dr. Octopus versus Spider-Man fight, but that was only like, an issue or two. Todd McFarlane, Romita, and Bagley were some of the people that people think of the most when they think of 90s comics artists. McFarlane helped redo and change the structure of Spider-Man comics, allowing for more freedom and expression of style, which is most evidently clear within his drawings. They're some of the most detailed drawings I've ever seen in my life, and it helps him stick out from all the other artists at the time, especially before him. He ended up making a separate run for himself, literally just called Spider-Man and not Amazing Spider-Man, but he was also the artist that created Venom and that whole storyline, and as well as worked on Peter and MJ's early marriage. In the bluntest way possible, I would say McFarlane is a bit of a horn dog, or at least he was one romantic one. He drew a lot of MJ in like lingerie and didn't really try and hide from drawing sexual stuff, or at least sexual implied. But as a straight guy, I can't really complain, just wanted something to point out. But another thing that he did with his art style was, as people call them, spaghetti webs. He really liked to do that like a bit too much. Like if you look at the screen here, it's just fucking everywhere. It gets a little overbearing, a bit much for me at times, but it's just his style, and he's very dramatic and expressive. It's like almost everything he does, especially Peter whenever he's web swinging, like it looks like he's breaking his back, or is supposed to bend that way. However, at times his faces can look uneven or just dull at points, but that gets fixed with the next artist, Erik Larson. I'll be blunt and say it. In my opinion, I think Erik Larson is better than Tom McFarlane in terms of their art. I see Larson's art as more of a polished and fixed-up version of McFarlane's art. He keeps the wacky and dynamic posing and faces and all that stuff, but fixes it out and doesn't make it look so sloppy or wonky. He can draw a pretty hefty kingpin, which when I first saw it, I did kind of laugh a little bit. Larson's sense of action kept me entertained because Spider-Man moves a lot and it was easy to see and understand, and I certainly feel like he helped with Venom's design, making the signature jaw with all those crazy teeth. McFarlane's design originally was just a big smile with regular teeth, which looked disturbing, which helped with the menacing part, but I personally just prefer Larson's art design over McFarlane's. His run with the Punisher and Doctor Doom were some of my favorite of the 90s, especially with considering what comes after, which was the ever-so-loved Clone Saga, drawn by Mark Bagley. Absolute legend. Seriously, I have no idea where to even start when talking about Bagley. He worked on the main title for around 5 years, which is record-breaking in terms of length of time, because no one else has really worked that long. However, it does nothing when comparing his run on Ultimate, which will come at a later time. It should be no shock to anyone when I say this, but he is excellent in drawing Peter Parker characters all about, Peter, MJ, all that. He is also responsible for the design of Carnage and making that whole Absolute Carnage storyline a 14-parter. This is going to make me sound like a broken record, but from now on I'm just going to say it flat out. Almost every artist knows how to draw action well. Bagley really knows how to storyboard it. In terms of action, he will emphasize what is the important and what isn't. Like a simple punch will just take like a little square or something, but if it's like a fight or a hit that'll change the fight, it will take up more, like a half page or a full page, for example. But as I mentioned previously, he was the main artist during the Clone Saga debacle, so he was working and developed Ben Reilly, Kane, and almost everybody that was related to that whole portion of the story. I wasn't around for that part, so I never really noticed how much the mess was until afterwards. But fun fact, him and Romita Jr. were some of the people that drew and defined Peter's long 90s hair, like the little lion's mane, I believe people call it. But that is my hairstyle when I think of adult Peter Parker. But he also did do a crossover with Batman and Spider-Man. I'm surprised on how well he did draw Batman, but then I checked, he made some other Batman comics himself. But in that one, Peter has an actual mullet, it's unbelievable. But Bagley's still working on Spider-Man to this day. He works a slot on the current just Spider-Man run, not Amazing Spider-Man. But much like Bagley, the next artist still works to this day, Joe Bennett. Joe Bennett still works with Marvel, and his latest work on the Immortal Hulk run with Al Ewing ended in late 2021. I like Bennett's art, however, there wasn't really much to say about, at least in his Spider-Man run. His Hulk story is a whole different thing in another video. He was good at drawing facial expressions. It was clear that you could tell the state of emotions and confusion or whatever the hell the people are feeling. You can clearly see that. One thing it did make was the Carnage and Silver Surfer combo. That was pretty cool. His dynamic posing was also on another level. I don't believe there was a single panel that I can remember where a character was in single focus, main focus, and they were just kind of just standing there doing nothing. Everyone had their arms moving or something. It was cool. Never didn't work on the run for too long, especially nowhere near as Bagley. But John Byrne's art, who came after, is a mixed bag in my opinion. He has a remarkable sense of destruction of motion when it comes to combat. However, it's kind of weird though how Peter sometimes he will look like a kid and he also look like his age. You can't really describe it, however, I'll just show a picture up right here. He worked on the story for about 30 issues with his last artist before the Straczynski run being, John Byrne. When I rank these, unlike the Golden Age, there were a lot more than just a few. There were 7 or 8. So I'm going to rank them top 3 instead of just ranking them all. My third place goes to Bennett. Second place goes to Larson. And the first place goes to Bagley. Originally, I would have given the Romita Jr. #1 spot. However, he worked in the 90s on the sidelines, which my favorite art came from. And all these artists were good, and this was the era where the encouragement for everyone's own style kind of started to come into play. And in conclusion, the Silver Age had its up and downs in terms of story and art, from the marriage of Peter and Mary Jane all the way to the Clone Saga. Overall, I enjoyed the art during this era quite a bit, much more than the Golden Age, but still not better than Ditko. The Bronze Age covers the start of the JMS run to the end of Slot's run. We're going to switch it up from 2015 to 2018. A little bit of a change, but that's going to cover a lot more artists than this time now. So that's even more exciting. It's going to cover around 16 years of stories, so there's going to be much to be noted. If you enjoyed this video, have a good day.